Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, I assure you. But here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming, especially during these past 2 years. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, and Talking Toddlers, this podcast helps you develop that with clarity, confidence, and clear communication. So let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to Talking Toddlers. I'm Erin Heyer, your host, and last week we started to do a deep dive into the connection with speech and eating development and how those two things are in sync and really are two sides of the same coin in a very complex, beautiful synchronicity in growth and development. It lays the foundation to wonderful language, eating, social skills, all of it. So this week, I'm going to continue at about the 4th to the 6th month period. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, please stop now and go back so you get those really important elements from birth to those first 3 months of life. So at about 4 or 5 months, there's a big increase in lip control and movement, which is critical for early babbling and overall speech, but eating as well. So you begin to see an increase in the jaw, the lip, and the tongue muscles moving separately. And there's also a differentiated babbling of their different strings of sounds. Again, a lot of it is they kind of find these vocalizations by accident, but they are looking at our mouths more. And so they're trying to put their visual data that they're collecting and mapping it with some auditory and then feeling their way through some of this vocal play. There's also an increase in this period of intraoral air pressure in the mouth, which is very critical to speech. So our lips come together and their air builds up behind it and then pops it open for the P or the B or the M. Ba, ba. Right? And so this whole pressure, and we can think of the mouth, the oral cavity, the larynx, the throat, and the air coming up as a series of valves that are opening and closing and opening and closing. And somewhere between the 5th and 6th month, as the teeth begin to come in, and they're really moving from that primitive biting and chewing reflexes to purposefully seeking that out, because they're gaining a lot of sensory motor regulation through that. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into the whole biting developmental process. And why is that important to speech? Because it's building that sensory awareness. They're connecting, their brain and their neurons are firing and connecting. Oh gosh, when I move my jaw up and down for this biting, it feels good. It's helping me self-regulate, but it's also feeding at literally the jaw strength. So during this period, if they've had a pretty good introduction to early bottle or breastfeeding, their mouth and their digestive systems are getting ready to take in more tabletop foods. We could begin with the pureed foods, which, a lot of families do, especially here in the United States, the jarred foods. But I will later on in this episode, I'll talk a little bit more explicitly on kind of a new trend, pretty popular in the last, I don't know, I'd say 8 or 10 years with baby-led weaning. And we'll talk more about that. But this is right now between this 4 and 6 month period. It's a beautiful little transition where the baby's mouth is a little bit more exploratory, and they're going to seek out things that they see in their environment, your food on your plate, that seems interesting to them. And we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. But this period of 4 to 6 months, there's a big developmental burst. And there's just one burst after another in these first 3, 4, 6 years of life. But your little guy or gal is getting ready to experiment with different foods, different textures through biting and chewing. And again, as the primitive reflexes become a little bit more integrated into our system, because they are developing more motor control over it, and they don't have to rely on these reflexes for quote unquote survival. And this is also a perfect time to begin to introduce open cup drinking. Last week, I did talk about how the body grows in kind of these gross motor skills and then out to these fine motor skills. And so it's the whole body, the trunk, the arms, the hands, the fingers, right, to become more refined in their motor skill development. And that's the same for the mouth too. So this open cup drinking is important because they can stabilize the jaw more at what we would call midline. There are 6 steps to the jaw height, from a high E to an open or a low ah. And so when we go to receive the lip of a cup, hopefully flat, right? There's not kind of a ridge to it, so you're not giving them too much tactile information. It's pretty smooth, but they can protrude the lips just enough to have a good seal around that cup, and the jaw has enough strength and control and mobility to hold at midline so they can receive the sip of water. And this is under between 4 and 6 months is under an adult kind of control. They're holding it and helping them. They don't have yet the hand control or the arm control, even, or the being able to bring it to midline and track it up to their lips. But they're able to disassociate their lips to come out. That's also building their sensory awareness and their motor planning for lip closure for the M, the P, the B, and the W sound, the woo sound. And so we need to do that as the jaw begins to become stronger and more stable. Then they can use the lips more. Now, between the 5th and 6th month, this is a great time to really begin to introduce mechanically soft foods or purees, right? Again, it's more exploratory, but even, helping them build their awareness that they can move their jaw up and down by giving them like a little baby cookie that requires a little stimulation there with the bite. And babies at this stage at 5 or 6 months will have this rhythmic bite reflex still, but you're feeding their brain this experience so they can gain control over this motor planning. And the jaw, I cannot speak more highly. The whole jaw stability and gradation, moving up those steps, is so important for speech and language. Many, many times when I see children at 2.5 and 3.5 and 5 even, and they have really poor jaw strength and stability. And we have to we always go back and start with jaw exercises so they can then have begins speaking at the starting point, right? With our lips slightly touching, our back teeth almost touching. We don't want clenched teeth, right? And the tongue is resting up on the roof of the mouth. And all of this is really developed with every bite, every chew, every swallow. And during this period of 4 to 6 months, as they're exercising, literally exercising through a lot of this vocal play with you and by themselves, you're going to hear them really talk to themselves all day, every day, but also exploring these different tastes and textures. So if at this stage you were to place foods on the side of their gums, then you would see a diagonal rotary chew pattern that we call, meaning that the lower jaw will move from side to side. Again, this is a precursor step necessary for a mature rotary grind that you and I do with our lips closed, and we're able to masticate or chew that food, whether it's meat or carrots or, tough bread. We're chewing and grinding it, and the jaw is moving up and down, but it's also rotating. So this, at about 5 or 6 months, they're beginning to stimulate that kind of rotary chewing pattern. So also what's happening developmentally as they grow and exercise through talking and verbal play and eating and chewing, the mouth, throat, the esophagus, the voice box, right? The respiratory system are all building this kind of intricate relationship through valves and pressures and changing so they can phonate, they can turn on their little vocal cords, right? And if you wiggle your larynx down there, and then they move lips or tongue or jaw height to change different pitch and tones. And think of your mouth as kind of this musical instrument, right? And we're changing and playing with it. And you don't even have to really move your tongue, just move your jaw up and down. And I'll do it here on this with this microphone, but I'm just going to move my jaw up and down as I phonate. And my tongue is resting at the floor. It hasn't disassociated. It's just hanging out there, but I'm making that ya sound, right? And a little bit later when or the baby has a little bit more control over the back half of the tongue, and they can spread out the sides of the tongue a little bit. We call them kind of like butterfly wings. Then they can make a better ya sound, right? That's also needed for that infamous R. But during this period of 4 to 6 months, the processes of disassociation, remember I said that they can stabilize a part of their body. So let's think of it in gross motors where we can stabilize our trunk, our torso, and just flap our arms up and down. Then I can stabilize my arm and just wiggle at the wrist and move my hand. And then I can stabilize my hand and just wiggle my fingers at the knuckle bones, right? That's stability. And that's what happens in our mouth. So once we have good stability of our trunk, then we can move our head separate from our trunk of our body, right? And then we can stabilize the head and just move our jaw up and down for the talking and the biting, the ya. And then we can stabilize our jaw, move our lips. That's when the lips come out and we're getting ready for all those lip sounds, but also to receive a cup and sips of water. And then I can stabilize my lips and just move my tongue in isolation. And then the fine motor coordination will be to stabilize the tongue within the mouth itself and within the tongue structure itself, the 4 pairs of different muscles that work together. So just around 6 months is usually when most babies, a good, healthy, kind of eventful, very exciting, but, no trauma has happened, that the most little babies at 6 months have enough strength to sit up, and they're really ready for finger foods and some spoons and open cup drinking under supervision, 100% supervision and guidance, but really being able to introduce that. And what I would like, and through these periods, through 6 months to their first birthday, and that's when, the real true first words come, but there's so much happening motorically, cognitively, just that human human connection that we're building, but also the babies are really moving from a suck to a more purposeful swallow pattern. And so it continues to mature up through that first birthday. And then really the adult version of a rotary grind chew is around their second birthday. But these 5 or 6 months, that's really about, the teeth are starting to erupt, and they're starting to really bite with intention and purpose. And if they're seeking a lot of biting at the time, then that's when you guys can step in and give them appropriate biting tools, there. And I will have on the show notes here some companies that I use and highly recommend, and one of them is Talk Tools. But the teeth is erupting, and there's a correlation, which is biting and chewing help develop the jaw strength and the appearance or the eruption of the teeth. And so if I know in my 35 years of experience and a number of speech pathologists who only specialize in feeding disorders, that we see a correlation, not necessarily a 1-to-1, but a high correlation between if there are biting or chewing delays, then there typically are late teeth eruptions, and the jaw strength is also underdeveloped. So remember, the speech processes of the jaw, lips, and tongue, disassociation, ability to stabilize, and then move another, element or articulator there in the mouth to produce speech and chew. So at this point, I want to touch upon and go back to look at baby-led weaning. And that's something, as I mentioned, that's become more and more popular over the last 8 to 10 years here in the United States, but across the world. And it's usually around 6 months of age. And it coincides with babies who are capable of reaching for food, right? They see that and they have the trunk stability and they can reach their arm out and pull something to put in their mouth, right? Now, they don't have the fine motor dexterity with the fingers and all of that, but they can certainly reach for something and put it in their mouth. And he or she is telling us, hey, I have enough gross motor skills to do this. Now, the term baby-led weaning doesn't necessarily mean that we're weaning babies off of the breast or the bottle. No. It's about complementing. And again, remember, I've said from the beginning that all of this developmental process, babies don't just wake up and start eating, tabletop food. It's a process, it's a developmental experience, and they build this intricate network of motor planning and thinking and reasoning and taste buds and all of this over time. So introducing and letting babies lead the way and taking charge. So what baby-led weaning actually means is it encourages parents to let the children, take control. And so it emphasizes that a baby is really in the driver's seat, so to speak, to be putting the food in the mouth. And even though we can say between 4 and 6 months, we can introduce the foods on a spoon. We can introduce foods on the tip of our finger so they can suckle, sweet potatoes off of our finger, pureed sweet potatoes or mashed, and they get exploring the taste and the texture of something that is very different than the formula or the breast milk. And it's also part of letting the, babies understand that this is a reciprocal and interactive activity, this eating and feeding, right? That the baby-led weaning kind of mindset, or it is kind of a movement that's going on, means that the baby eats what we eat. And we just modify the textures or some of the flavors to help them explore and be introduced to our healthy food. It's all about health, right? The other element to it, which I think, especially Americans, but I can't only speak to that, but I'm assuming that we get a little uptight because it's messy process. And the whole idea is to let the baby explore and feel, because remember I said that babies' mouths are really, quote, the window to the world. And so you're beginning, even though their motor skills are increasing, you're beginning to allow them to experience through all sensory channels and build a healthy relationship with food and eating. So it can be messy, and so you put down those plastic mats all over the place, and sometimes other family members get a little ticked off, but you just explain to them that this is a process, and and over time, as their fine motor skills get better and they can hold a utensil, by 12 months or 14 months or 16 months, then it's less messy every day, right? But the gross motor stability to support the fine motor. So they have to practice, right? They have to sit in this chair and move their arms and reach and grab. And over time, they will get better. The only way they get better with utensils, i.e., handwriting with a pencil, that's one of our goals, right? When they're 7 or 6, is that they have to start here, back at 6 months, reaching and grabbing big chunks of avocado. So you follow the baby's cues rather than letting the parents control the spoon feeding. And I have to say that, it wasn't very popular or even well known a lot, 21 years ago when I had my beautiful little baby. But I didn't mind messes. And so it was kind of part of our natural development. In hindsight, it's hard for me to remember exactly, at what time. I know that we started to introduce solid foods around 5 months. And she really, gravitated toward what we were eating. And that was one of kind of my mindsets, only because I saw what picky eaters at 3 and 5 looked like. And I saw, tens and tens of families who at that time would cook 2 different meals. And I'm like, I'm never going down that path. And so, I think this whole baby-led weaning movement is being well embraced by the younger moms, the 20-something and 30-something, and I too am embracing it. one of the big, so messes are a problem or a complaint. And then the worry about gagging and or choking, which are two different experiences. And so what the advocates are in this whole baby-led weaning thing is that parents need to get comfortable with gagging. The gag reflex was given there on purpose by the higher God to protect us. And it's there for life, right? We want a gag reflex that if we start laughing in the middle of a fine dinner in a fine restaurant, that we're going to, spit it back up. Choking is something entirely different. So gagging is nature's way of protection. Choking is really when there is no sound, right? And I tell people, like, if I'm coughing on something, then that doesn't mean I'm choking. Don't start hitting me on the back. It just means that my gag reflex worked and I irritated the fine mucosal skin in my throat. But choking is obstruction and there's no sound because there's no air. You can't breathe. That is problematic. But for our little babies at 6 months, and we're going to talk about sitting up appropriately and good posture, if they're sitting up, then they won't choke if we're watching them, right? If we're eating with them and sharing the meal. And that I'm going to talk a little bit about too, is that it's all about social connection and social meal sharing. But a gag is there to protect us. It's an uncomfortable sensation, but we can usually cry or gasp for air. But the choking is, very, very, very serious. And I understand, but it's pretty darn rare. So you don't want, we want a lot of good supervision, especially in those first couple of months, because you don't want too many gagging and or choking experiences, because that's where food aversions can arise. So again, mindful parenting, be present, share the meal, one family, and let the baby experience pleasure during this mealtime. So then, as we relate all of this to baby-led feeding and oral motor growth and development, at the same time, they're babbling up a storm, you're engaged with them, and that your baby has opportunity after opportunity to really build this oral motor strength and coordination, not only with food, but it's important that that he or she has a variety of toys that they can bite on and chew on and discriminate with different densities and textures, which is a great time because biting helps calm and relax the heart rate. It's a great time to use this biting and chewing with your baby during a book shared time. And in a previous episode, I talked a lot about, reading to your baby and helping them attend to your spoken language and share this visual book with them. And one way to kind of separate what goes in your mouth, these toys go in your mouth, this food goes in your mouth, but books don't. But chewing will also, chewing and taking sips from a cup will also slowly but surely replace the sucking and suckling for calming, right? So you can look at it as a physical workout. So the oral motor movements actually build the jaw strength. It thins out those fat cheek pads, giving more space in the oral cavity. So then the tongue has room to move. It gains better cheek muscle control. So it relies less on those primitive reflexes, and then the tongue begins to disassociate itself, the back from the front and the sides, for a wider variety of speech sounds, some by accident, some on purpose, during this 5, 6 to 8, 9 months. So one of the things that I do caution very, very young parents or parents who are expecting, that we have seen, speech pathologists, OTs, PTs, that we know that when there is less discrimination, mouth exercises available, then speech tends to be later, right? So part of my questionnaire, my history collection with my parents is, do they put things in their mouth to chew on? And we need to kind of look at that. And if a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old is still chewing on his clothes or chewing on, his fingers, then, there's a correlation with later speech development. Let's just talk a little bit about how kids at 5, 6 months of age do mouth things for calming. And up to this point, quite often many children use a pacifier. That sucking is for calming. But now is a good time to think about weaning the pacifier, the suckling, calming movement patterns to biting. We adults, hopefully, although I have met a couple of young adults who, but hopefully we don't suck our thumbs or use a pacifier. What do we do to calm and self-regulate? We chew gum. Some people chew on ice. Some people like to sip cold water. It's all about self-regulation, focus, and attention. When you're working on a paper or you're sitting in a meeting, some people, chew on the inside of their cheek. I had a therapist that used to do that. And so this is a good time if we choose to wean our children off of a pacifier as we switch up with more biting experience and physical exercise, physical workouts. So then we could jump into that 5 to 9 month old. And now kids are really babbling and having conversations. They've spent a lot of time on their belly, right, mom, right, dad, right, aunt and uncle, grandma, and whomever. And so they have a good respiratory inhalation and exhalation. They're building more strength in their upper chest and their neck and their shoulders and their arms. And the teeth are coming in. And so they have better motor control of the jaw, the lips, the tongue, the cheeks. And there's a lot more differentiated sounds. And that's one thing that I ask parents a lot. They'll say, oh, yeah, he's really noisy. And I'll say, well, listen to the sounds they make. Are they different sounds? Do the lips come together and say ba, 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 and the tongue tip comes up, da, 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 and the tongue back goes up, ga, 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 ga. Do the lips round for a wah, 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 wah. And we want, differentiated. We want different vowel sounds. Bobby, bobby, boo, 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 baby, baby. Baby is different than ba-ba, right? They're the same vowel sound. We want a lot of more refined playing with different movements in our mouth that produce then different sounds. Because during this period, as they're being introduced to chewing and biting foods, they're also increasing a wide variety of sounds native to their language, right? It's not just English, but all of these babies, no matter what language is their native tongue, will do the same developmental process. Remember, I call these children, or we in my field will refer to newborns as citizens of the world. They're wired to learn any language and is based on what they hear day in and day out. But through these oral motor practices, these exercises, workouts, that the oral motor space is increasing in their mouth, and then they're increasing the stability and disassociation. So now let's move into kind of that 6 to 8 month period. And babies are really ready for true transitions into tabletop food or adult food, right? And one of the reasons is because, and that's at about 6 months, but their exploration with food is correlated with their ability to really speak longer and longer utterances. That's because their torso and their strength, they're able to sit up, and they're able to slowly expel their airflow as they move their articulators in their mouth, their jaw, their tongue, their lips, and turn their voice on and off. And so you're hearing a lot more, it might be jargon, but there's intonation patterns, there's pitch flow, there's speed, going up and down. It's all interconnected with the eating, the speaking, the social communication. Once you start introducing them to tabletop food, then you, mom, dad, whomever is spending the most mealtime with them, need to sit down with them, and we can talk a little bit more specifically about that. But it's about maintaining that human connection and cognitive growth as they begin to understand how this world works, and it's not just that I'm going to, shove, for lack of a better word, the spoon in your mouth and feed you to get it over with. No, we're going to experience this meal together. And slowly you then bring them into the kitchen with you so they can begin to have this relationship, a healthy relationship with food. At the same time, you're talking, right? We can go back to, what do you do with a baby who isn't really talking from birth to 12 months of age? You're wiring their brain, you're narrating, and you're talking, oh, these are sweet potatoes. I love sweet potatoes. This is broccoli. It's green. It's so fun to eat. And it goes down in your tummy, and you say, yum, yum, yum. And it loves to go in your tummy with the sweet potatoes. So let's step back for a second and see the big picture of what's going on. Again, these kids, your kids, my kids, our kids, do not grow these, developmental needs in isolation, right? So what's going on developmentally with the motor? You're spending time on the floor with your kids in tummy time to help build their gross and fine motor independence and strength and control. By 6 months, a child should begin to sit up independently, right? And so then they can also begin to transfer objects from one hand to another. And they learn that, and they strengthen that from all that tummy time, that frontal workout on the floor. And so during that time, you can also be, handing them just out of their reach little objects that they might, reach for. And what they do is they adjust. And so they'll, lift up one arm and reach for it, stabilizing their body, their torso on like this tripod, right? Their one hand and their two hips or legs. All this time is also prepping them, all this tummy time is prepping them for true crawling, which is very, very important to language and higher order language and reading and writing. And I'll have an episode just on crawling. But all of this strength training on the tummy builds their ability to sit in a high chair ready to eat solid foods, right? It's all the same strength training, all the same coordination that we use for connected speech and language. We have to be able to, when I meet a child and they slump in, I always use a therapeutic high chair for some of my oral motor training, but also for speech and language. And I want them to be able to sit up in a chair and be stable. And then, because that helps with attention and focus and language building. So with that in mind, when you're spending all this beautiful time on the floor with your baby, don't just put them there and let them, hang out. You can do that from time to time, of course, but when you are there with him or her, you're encouraging them to reach for things, to move across midline, right? So you place a little interesting truck or, cow animal or something on the right side, and he reaches, across his midline where his, body is cut in half. And, left to right, right to left, and you alternate it. And so they're building both hemispheres. So one of the reasons, and I'll just give this tidbit about crawling, is you're building the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, as well as the upper motor neurons and the lower motor neurons. So think of what crawling is, where we alternate the left hand forward and the right knee and hip, but we have to have enough strength to be up on all fours. And that comes with practice every single day, right? Keep in mind when babies are reaching for food or reaching for toys, whether they're sitting up in the high chair or they're practicing on their belly, hand dominance typically is not fully fully developed or fully blossomed until about their third birthday. So they will switch back and forth. And so another reason for us to continue to give them opportunities to cross midline, and to put both their hands together, to work things out, like to pull toys apart, or to put toys, inside another one, working midline. Again, all of these neurological pathways are being built that support language processing. It supports the oral motor coordination for speech, which is the physical part of talking. But again, it also supports the higher order language and builds language over time. So we have to help both hemispheres, both sides of the brain, really be stimulated. That's the word, stimulated. So keep that in mind when you're spending time on the floor with your child. So then that brings me to another kind of caution or a point of interest that I don't know if it's worldwide. It certainly is pretty big here in the U.S. I know my family is pretty notorious, but, sometimes we can blame it on the dads or the uncles or whatever, that we rush to getting a kid to walk. And I said this, when I first started this podcast, and I'll probably say it every day going forward, is that earlier is not better. And there's a reason why all of these motor development, because it's building cognition, which is understanding, not necessarily intelligence or smarts, but it's this cognition of understanding how our body works in this three-dimensional world and how our world interfaces with us, right? So don't rush to get your child to stand up and walk. Trust me that if you give them enough opportunities to be on the floor with you and crawl, they will do it. And it's important to let nature unfold, but you as the parent, as I've always said, need to help support and encourage and try things that are hard, like getting up on all fours, and, they'll begin to rock and all of that. But don't rush to get up on both legs. So you might be asking, why is a speech pathologist, talking and listening and all of this stuff? Why am I so interested in all of this motor planning? And I hope you understand a little bit better of how these all fit together. And this human being isn't this intricate system. But realize that fine motor skills, which speech is, think about it, the tongue, the lips, the jaw, that's fine motor. When we say the word, or a pattern like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, think of all the fine motor, teeny tiny movements that you have to do inside there. In order to achieve good fine motor skill, it is 100% dependent on strong gross motor development. So when the child is about 6 months old and you're putting them in the high chair, ready to introduce them to solids, there's critical motor ability needed to be able to sit up and receive solid food and chew it safely and enjoy it. Right? So let me just briefly kind of outline it. And I share this a lot with parents and with older kids who are struggling with chewing and speech issues. But they, think of like a high chair or any kind of straight back chair, and think of 90 degrees, right? It all begins with the hips, and what, OTs and feeding specialists say is, quote, what happens in the hips, you see in the lips. So they have to be sitting up with their pelvis with a slight tip forward. And so that gives them a strong base on their bum, right? And because if they're slouching back, remember, they come into this world 9 months in utero in a curled up like a ball, right? And so for the first 5-6 months, you've been helping them stretch out over time. And now they've been spending plenty of time from day one on their belly, helping to strengthen the front of their body. So in the beginning, depending on the size of your child and all, you want to sit them up in your high chair. And if you need to, add some bolsters, right? At the rib cage, you can roll up some towels. You can also roll up a little dish towel and put it under their knees. So think of like 90 degrees where they're sitting up, and there's 90 degrees at their hips, right? And the 90 degrees at their knees and 90 degrees at their ankles. So you want, to use these bolsters at the rib cage, under their knees. And then you could even use like a box of some sort, a shoe box, or I've used telephone books that I don't think most houses have anymore, but shoe boxes are great. You tape it to the base of the floor. Some fancy high chairs have adjustable footrests, but you can just use some duct tape. And you really want, you could even put a little towel on the back because you want them to be sitting up. And so if you have 90 degrees at the hips, the knees, and the ankles, then you're going to have 90 degrees at the shoulders and the jawline. So think of, or up the neck to the jawline, right? And then they're ready for speech exchanges there in the high chair with you as you're sharing this meal and safely chewing. So safety first, always. But think of this. A friend of mine once told me this. It's sort of like if you have ever sat up in a high bar stool and they didn't have a footrest and your feet are just hanging. It's very, very uncomfortable. It's hard to find comfortable and to sit still, and you're just not enjoying yourself. And so if kids' feet are hanging, and when they're little, 5 or 6 months, they often don't fit that footrest. So again, stability is the first step in all of this, right? So physical stability in the chair is a must. It's what I teach every single one of my kids and families when, no matter what age, whether they're 14 months or, 24 months or 6 years, that even, an 8-year-old kid who has really, really bad posture, most likely due to some low muscle tone. I sit, we do a lot of physical exercise between our speech exercises, but it's all about being able to sit comfortably in 90 degrees in a chair. So I know I'm going through this as a deep dive, but I want parents to really sit back and just kind of listen to this in this framework, this 30,000 foot view, as well as some of connecting the dots and understanding how the gross motor and the fine motor, eating and chewing and speech are in sync with one another. At the same time, you're spending quality time with your kids, your little ones, and you're connecting. And the other piece, think about this for the first, several months when you were breastfeeding or bottle feeding and you were connecting with your baby, right? Talking to them and spending time. Hopefully you weren't on your phone too often. But it's really about, spending time during feedings. So when you transition them into this high chair, make sure that you're sitting in an eye-to-eye position. You're sharing this meal. So you could scoot the chair up to the tabletop or use the tray for the chair. Either way, if you're tall like me, then I usually sit in a little kid's seat or a little cube chair. And so I'm always eye-to-eye with my kids when I work with them. And I have a one-way mirror, so I'm always encouraging parents to do the same. It's about that connection. It's about nutrition, yes. It's about safety, yes, but it's also about building that relationship and using mealtime for language stimulation, right? And teaching kids how to, safely chew and take food and then talk. And here's a side note. This happened several years ago, not several, but before the pandemic, because it's when I used to spend a lot of time in preschools and, training the teachers and helping kids in different, classroom environments. But I would often sit with them during snack or lunch. And I noticed maybe 3 years ago how the schools were not letting or kind of discouraged talking during meal times. And I finally asked, and I asked several different people at several different sites, some public, some private, and it was all about, well, we're afraid that the kids are going to choke. And I understand, I certainly do, but it really misses so much opportunity that wrapped into that with language, with sharing and talking about, where the food comes from and the different seasons and having different flavors and all of this. And at the same time, helping kids learn how to eat and chew safely. And I don't know, it just really kind of blew my mind. And I was a little stunned. And so I, at that year, I guess it was 2017, 2018, I purposefully went out and did some trainings with how to take this beautiful opportunity, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, to help kids build their social language and how you can use food to build healthy relationships and to share and celebrate. And I don't know, it just was shocking to me. So I just wanted to put that out there. And at the same time, then I went to parents and knowing that our life, again, our modern life has gotten busy and hectic, and we rarely sit down as a family and share a meal. And another kind of habit that I think busy families have gotten into is letting mostly the toddlers kind of just graze, run around, and they can't tolerate sitting at the table, and they just pick food and they run around, and that's not healthy either. It's not a healthy way to eat, and it certainly isn't safe, but it lacks a lot of opportunity to help build rich language and social communication and family time. So keep that in mind. Think about what you guys are doing, what your daily habits are, your routines, and how can you improve them? We can all improve. And I think it's just, very important that we understand how we kind of lay this foundation and build a lifelong appreciation for healthy food, being able to really chew and masticate our food, and then building social communication and verbal skills, because we have good gross motor and fine motor. So on that note, I think I'm going to continue on with this kind of series topic, because I also want to weave in and share some ideas about how during these first 6 months and then the second 6 months up until that first birthday, where those first quote unquote true words pop in, because we're also building their cognitive skills. And I mentioned that a few minutes ago in relation to, just understanding how this world works and understanding how feeding and learning how to eat in a socialized manner helps build cognition. And so I want to dive a little bit into that as we continue this relationship between learning how to eat and chew solid foods and build a healthy relationship and speech and language development. Okay, so that's it for this week. And next week, we'll continue this conversation and building a really rich understanding of how critical these first 2 years in motor development as it relates to speech. So thanks again, seriously, for spending your precious time with me and allowing me to kind of give you some of the things that I've learned the hard way sometimes. And, I certainly didn't know this, all this 35 years ago. And the truth is, a lot of this, as a speech pathologist, as a new or younger speech pathologist, you have to go looking for. So a lot of our graduate programs don't really dive deep into feeding or oral motor issues, and that's another whole story. But you parents, again, are, up front and center with your kids. And so the more background knowledge you have and the more awareness you have, then the better you can help guide them through these developmental steps along the way. So please, if you liked this, go and share a review. I would love it, because it helps me, get bumped up into the algorithms of the infamous social media. Share it with friends and family, teachers. And I look forward to furthering this discussion next week. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.